Hello and welcome to Problems Episode 2. Well, we're not really kind of episoding things with this series, but I'm Joe here with my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're talking about the problem with the second Spider-Man costume, or the Venom Symbiote when it was attached to Peter. Oh, well, Venom. There. End of conversation. This costume was the source of so many problems. Now,
I mean, it's partially why Spider-Man 3 sucked.
actually, yeah. Well,
What's happening to me?
oh my god.
Yeah, it's like
That stupid dance.
it,
Like, Peter really came off creepy. Well, Tobey Maguire-esque. I'm kidding. In that third movie. Although, not that the first two set a very high bar. They set a very low bar. Then again, all the Spider-Man live-action movies did. Actually, all Spider-Man movies set a pretty low bar. Let's not exclude that terrible Into the Spider crap. Or Spider-Verse or Crapverse movie.
or Clone Saga copycat ripoff.
Yep. If you're just going to end up copying that storyline, just why not adapt it? But
I mean,
we're giving Marvel too much.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, we're giving Marvel way too much credit. And that's where, as well as Disney, for one thing. All right, this costume, as far as abilities goes, can produce its own organic webbing, which is way stronger than most webbing of Spider-Man. Like, stronger than his organic webbing. Stronger than most of his web shooter's webbing. I think it's only when Spider-Man starts to mix Hulk DNA with his... that he, like, some of the blood, spilled blood of Hulk with this webbing. I think he eventually does that in the comics. And only that webbing is able to match the Venom Symbiote webbing. And now it also enhances Spider-Man, or in this case Peter, who was Spider-Man, his abilities way above the standard level, probably to around the Hulk level or something, because he was both in cartoon comics way stronger with this thing.
Oh yeah.
Way faster, way meaner. Now I know it. Like, we'll get to it altering the mood in a moment. This thing enhanced everything, even healing factor. Like, it enhanced everything. It can shapeshift into any costume, any outfit, and it can latch onto the person it like, it can latch onto anyone and subdue. If it succeeds in subduing your willpower, you now become bent towards its will. Now, people with a lesser willpower and who are weak-minded, like Eddie Brock, are very susceptible.
Yes.
What is more is that the costume also begins to copy, replicate, and in time replace the DNA of the original host organism, as Kurt Connors put it in the cartoon from the 90s. So this thing is one of the most dangerous parasites out there in the universe. It is also insane and pure evil. Now, I know a lot of people try to justify it and say, no, it loved Peter and it was just the evil and madness of Eddie that drove it nuts. No. It was already nuts and evil and trying to replace Peter's personality with its own. And all the acts of aggression and anger and sheer amount of violence that Peter exudes and committed was due to this thing. Like, Peter is a pretty sane guy ordinarily.
Yes.
And this thing turned him into a loon. And that, now, it does have weaknesses, namely fire, and more than that, sound. High-frequency sounds, like sonic booms and like clock towers, loud clocks, if it's right next to it, this sort of high-frequency sound can subdue and even defeat and kill it. That said, from what we can gather from, I would suspect even the comics and the cartoon, this thing might be older than Galactus.
And that's saying something.
Because it mentions it's seen, in the cartoon at least, I forget about the comics, it has seen universes begin and end, entire planets and civilizations, thousands, if not millions of them, rise and fall, and it remembers the Big Bang. And the way it talks, that's not the first Big Bang it's gone through. So this thing is beyond ancient. If you look at the two DC and Marvel's universes, this thing might actually be older than the Guardians of the Universe. And you've got to bear in mind, I think Appa is like 20 billion years old. And this thing predates him. And he's the old Guardian, as well as the best, the most good-natured one.
Mm-hmm.
He's the most moral. And this thing is older than him. This thing is beyond ancient.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond evil. And the fact that there's an entire planet out there of these things.
Mm-hmm.
That's terrifying.
The problem with the black costume, and including the symbiote, is that it's from an era that was starting to enjoy the anti-heroes.
Yep.
And even without the symbiote, Peter
Was falling apart.
and it drew the worst out of Peter.
But Peter showed he was a true hero when he said, I really, really want this because this makes my superhero career much easier. But like any true hero, he said, it brings out the worst in me and it's turning me into a monster. I can't keep this. I have to kill it. I have to get rid of it. It's a monster. And he tried his hardest, but this thing escaped. And in the cartoon, it does a better job. No offense. The comics did do a good job. I really love the Venom saga of the comics. It's just the cartoon does it a lot better. Because the cartoon does it like a 4 out of 4 or a 10 out of 10 type story. And the cartoon, like you got Peter at one point who's got Shocker and is about to kill him. He nearly kills Rhino, nearly kills Shocker, nearly ends up killing Eddie. And he just says, like, when he nearly kills Shocker, he finally says, like, what is this costume doing to me? What is it trying to make me do? And time again, he says, when he has the costume, I have the power, therefore, what's wrong with what I'm doing? But it's only when people like Kurt Connors, Felicia, like these people who are really good friends of his that tell him, you know something? You're starting to scare me. And when Shocker himself says, wait, you can't do this, this isn't moral, that he kind of, like, when the villain kind of is telling him, dude, there's something the matter with you. Like, I just love how, once again, in the cartoon, as well as in the comics, the one catchphrase comes in that his Uncle Ben always used to tell him, that with great power, there must always come great responsibility. And this costume follows the belief that might makes right. That if you have the power, you have the right to do what you want. So this thing's most dangerous ability is to disbalance the chemicals in your brain, your hormones, and start to replace it changes the way you think, especially if you're a moral person, with the idea that if you have the power, you have the right to do whatever you want. You essentially turn into Scar from Lion King.
Yeah.
Except probably loopier. And that's saying something considering Scar is the most insane of the Disney villains out there. Outside the Horned King.
Yeah.
Well, actually, maybe on par. But the thing is, this costume is nuttier than a fruitcake.
Yes, and it rendered our hero insane.
Yeah, which is...
Peter was starting to turn into an outright villain.
And the thing is, Peter Parker, both Ben Reilly and the clone Peter Parker, are both two of the most moral and ethical characters out there. Yes, Peter has a temper, but he is ethical. He is moral. He's a Boy Scout at his core.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing turned him into a monster.
In the cartoon, it showed a lot better a storyline that is often used, for example, with Superman. You know, Brand New Metropolis?
Oh, yeah.
The fact that they keep bringing that thing back with
the Justice Lords.
You have Injustice, and it's always Superman, always the Boy Scout that is turned.
And it's gotten old.
Yes, and some of this can be connected to the symbiote. But turning the best of heroes into villains and beating it over your head.
Yeah.
And keeping the anti-hero, that's the good guys.
Yeah. And the thing with the Venom Symbiote is it did a great job of that. And what's more is it did the whole Justice Lord thing and the slow slide into corruption better. Now, with the symbiote, both in the comics and the cartoon, it was a slow slide. It was not immediate. Because that's one thing I hate about the evil Superman thing. It's always 1 minute to the next he decides, oh, I will conquer humanity. No. And I hate that. If I have to see a fall from grace story, like with Warcraft 3, like here with Spider-Man with the symbiote, like with Anakin Skywalker, I want to see a slow fall. I want to actually see it on screen and see the hero start to slip.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's much more interesting than they get corrupted off screen.
Yeah, and that's also another problem with Injustice 2. Throughout the story...
Even Injustice 1 is garbage.
It's like looking at Injustice 2, they were... it looked like Superman was starting to get a redemption arc. He was starting to...
Come back.
And then in the ending, poof,
he's evil again.
Why?
And they had a great out. They could have made Batman the villain at the end.
Yeah, that would have been something interesting.
But they never want to make Batman the evil one, even though he'd be more likely to go evil. Because like they're just obsessed with Batman somehow being the most being perfect. And I hate that. It's the obsession of the anti-hero. Mm-hmm. But the thing with the Venom symbiote is, as we see, initially when Peter has it on, he just merely pushes away and throws away like the construction workers in the cartoon. Or like he beats the odd villain up. Now, not too much in the beginning of the comics. Like, you know what I mean? He still tries to avoid a bit of confrontation. He snaps a little at Aunt May, a little at MJ, a little, like, you know what I mean? Or Felicia or Flash. He just snaps a little, but then the next time he's out, he actually roughs up the villain a little too much. Then he snaps even more. And even harasses some characters. Then, like in the cartoon, he starts roughing up and almost hospitalizing some mercenaries and whatnot. Then he ends up nearly, he beats up Shocker. Then nearly kills him and Smythe and Brock. Like, he actively tries to harm these people. And you can see steadily how it's making him falter. Now, initially, when he first starts to snap a little, and he starts to defend himself, you can kind of see the justification. And the show and even the comics did a good job showing the justification. You know what I mean? Like, okay, he's just trying to get the job done. But then the next story is going a little further. Then the next story is going a little further. Then the next story, he's gone a little too far. And all the other characters are telling him, you're taking things way too far. But Peter sees it as, but I need it. And I'm doing a good job here. Mm-hmm. But then it's only when he's gone way too far and he's about to murder someone that he realizes, oh my gosh, what have I become? Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of this suit. Now, at the same time, it tries to hide from its wielder its weaknesses, typically. You know why? It's like, you know where they're like, where, like, you know, like, or like they think about, where did it come from? Or, what are its weaknesses? You don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. And those are good storyline hooks.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the costume is often used to make him much more edgier.
And what's worse, in some ways, I find, is the Marvel writers never quite knew what to do with it once they got rid of Eddie Brock. Mm-hmm. And the problem there is they were being uncreative and stupid. They stuck in a Mac Gargan. That's a stupid idea. Then Flash Thompson. That's even dumber. And they tried to do the same thing with Flash that they did with Spider-Man to an extent. Let's just make him edgy and give Flash Thompson a run. Venom Agent or something. That was stupid.
It's like,
and anyone who liked it was, yeah.
They tried to push Eddie Brock to be an anti-hero. That was a
joke.
Yeah,
and in the 90s, that's one of the best parts of the Clone Saga, when Ben takes him down.
Yeah, because I remember when Peter as Spider-Man was cracking and made a deal with Venom.
Yeah.
That was a line of thought that Peter had, which would be like when he had the black costume or when he had the symbiote.
Yeah.
It was edgy, anti-hero
nonsense.
Nonsense, grimdark.
Now, we're not saying you can't have an anti-hero. We're big fans of Batman. We give Batman a bit of a hard time. But, like, I really like Batman. I really like Nightwing. Nightwing is an anti-hero.
You have Red Hood.
Red Hood's a great character.
You have, at times, Gambit.
Gambit's a great character. Wolverine. I love Wolverine. Like, Wolverine is a big anti-hero. But Wolverine, you also see his ethical side. Every time he appears with Rogue, Jubilee, Rachel Gray, he is always on point. You see his moral side. Heck, there are some stories with him and, I think, Leech, him and the Morlocks. The thing about Wolverine is, even at his edgiest, you do see his morals. And I think, outside of the comics, probably his best depiction is probably the first 4 live-action movies, primarily, maybe the first 2 in a way, just with his relationship with Rogue. Even in the 3rd movie, they really nailed his relationship with Rogue. Now, I actually like the 3rd movie, but I have to admit, Logan, like, the scenes where he just, where he's at, do they hurt when they come out? Every time. Now, there's a certain sorrow and tragedy there. And it's a sad scene. And it was very bold of the movie to take that sad scene. They had nothing but sad scenes initially in the movie. You had the Auschwitz, you had Rogue, and then you have that one. Like, they're hitting you with those gut punches. Now, that's how X-Men should probably be presented to start with. And that's kind of a problem I had with the first X-Men cartoon. Evolution didn't kind of make the same mistakes, but then they never used Wolverine, which was stupid. I understand Cyclops is a great character, but you don't throw Wolverine and Storm out of the series entirely and focus only on Cyclops. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, the thing is, the symbiote is pure evil. There is no element of good to this thing. And this thing, like, causes the most damage in the cartoon. And even at a few points in maybe not, it does not cause quite as much damage in the comics or in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
Although, and the thing is, the Venom symbiote is, I think, probably the 2nd or 3rd strongest symbiote. It's also the cleverest and wisest. Second only to Carnage. Now, Venom and Carnage get a lot of a bad rap by some fans. And some people do say they're overrated. I disagree. I actually think they're underrated in some ways. And I hated that in the comics at one point. You had Carnage that was ripped in half by
Sentry.
As if that would even hurt Carnage. I actually think that they should have had Sentry take it into space, go to rip it in half, and it rips him in half. What would you say to that?
Or it bonds with him.
Which would power it up with his abilities.
Because he's,
its next host. When it goes back to Cletus... Cletus would die. But when it goes to its next host, it would give them the Sentry and Spider-Man powers.
Because the Sentry can exchange blows with the Hulk. In fact, World War Hulk.
Yeah, but what do you think of my idea that it would rip him in half?
That would show that Carnage isn't just another mook villain.
But that was part of the anti-Spider-Man propaganda and war Quesada was waging. And that's why Quesada's I don't like Dan Didio. But Quesada is even worse than Didio ever was.
Agreed.
And the Venom symbiote Quesada, Alonso, these buffoons keep trying to recast it into a good light. No, it is a villain. And it's a good villain.
And it's like people...
It's a good counterpoint to Spider-Man.
People would say, the Thunderbolts have a microchip in there. Like that would stop Venom.
Here's the problem. The host has the microchip. Won't do squat to the symbiote.
Besides, the symbiote would be able to destroy it from within.
Yeah, but even without that, would the bomb even hurt it?
No.
Like, even if it raises the temperature, it can recover. It has an amazing... It's healed from Johnny Storm's worst flames.
And Johnny is like... His fire is
up there.
Yeah.
He can pretty much go supernova.
Yeah.
And Venom and Carnage have both tanked those hits.
And that's impressive.
Now, I think Carnage eventually started to become immune to fire, which is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only reason we're branching to Carnage is just... It's kind of connected to Venom.
Yes. And...
Yeah. Now...
The primary themes here has to do with anti-heroes, the problems with anti-heroes, mismanagement of great villains.
And Carnage is one... Not Carnage. Venom is one of the greatest, as is Carnage, but Venom... What I love about Venom is that it's a counterpoint to Spider-Man, especially Peter Parker. Now, I do like Ben Reilly more, but I think Venom worked better as a Peter Parker villain. That said, the Clone Saga was building up Carnage to be a better counterpoint to Ben, which is really cool. But Venom and Peter, like, it's the antithesis. Peter has a worse temper than Ben.
Oh, yeah. People forget. Peter had a temper.
But Ben is saner than Peter in a lot of ways. Yeah. And that's why the more insane Carnage is a better counterpoint to him. His sanity and groundedness in reality, like his mental groundedness, like he's very down to earth, versus the insanity of Carnage. Venom's sheer sadism and cannibalistic fury, Punisher level fury, versus Peter's need to try and compensate. Like, Peter is always trying to restrain his temper. And this is why it pushes him to his breaking point. And that's important. It's a character-driven villain. Mm-hmm. Like, what I mean is, like, when it latches onto Peter, it's a character-driven arc. When he finally purges himself of it, purifies himself of it, and has to confront it, it is now a character-driven arc of him versus it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, like, I find that you can do a Carnage-like arc with Ben, but to the Peter Venom thing, but it has to be different. Mm-hmm. But the Venom with Peter thing, it's one of the things that, in some ways, was done better with Peter than it was done with Ben. That said, it is one of the greatest Peter Parker stories, if not the greatest. And while I do give the 1962 to 1994 era a bad rap a lot of the time, there are some great stories during that time. I mean, Harry, Green Goblin. That was a brilliant idea. Venom, Carnage, the marriage arc. Like, these are the best stories of Peter Parker. But here's the thing. They came out in the 80s, and even Goblins at the gate. They came out in the 80s to early 90s. That was the best Peter Parker period.
And I know during the time where Felicia made him the black costume, one problem is that they kept ping-ponging between both costumes until the storyline where Peter burns it because Venom went after MJ and traumatized her.
Yeah.
And it's like,
what I think that they should have done with Spider-Gwen, you know, the insane axe of Spider-Man who dives on the Brooklyn Bridge, I actually think they should have given her Carnage.
Well, you officially now have Spider-Yandere.
Yeah, she was nuts to begin with. And she was obsessed on some level with Spider-Man / she hated Spider-Man. She was obsessed with Ben, or the original Peter. Like, she was already nuts over the whole Peter thing to begin with. Can you imagine her with the Carnage symbiote and his relationship with that symbiote? That would have been a... Now, that's what I think they should have done. Revive Gwen, latch this symbiote onto her, and the whole dichotomy of Jackal, Carnage Gwen, and Ben, there's suddenly a different dynamic to it. And Jackal would actually want to drive it from her, thinking, he wants his Gwen back. His fantasy Gwen. And Gwen wants the costume because, the thing about the Venom and Carnage symbiote is it does work like a drug. It's an addictive thing. It's very addictive. That's the only thing the Raimi movie got right. The addiction. Because it feeds on your adrenaline.
Exactly.
But yeah, you know what? Heck, I also like the Spider Carnage arc in the cartoon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I actually like that. It doesn't end in a fist fight. It ends in a psychological victory. That's the perfect finale for the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Because it started as a very psychological cartoon, and it ends on the same note.
Yes.
And I love that it also brings closure to the whole Uncle Ben Parker thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? With Ben Parker saying, I'm proud of you, Peter. That was perfect. That gives Peter closure with Uncle Ben.
Mm-hmm.
So, any last thoughts?
Well, most of it was covered. Such a costume, eventually, it was only going to be a temporary venture. Symbiote or no symbiote.
And I have to give the comic book writers credit. Now, I know a lot of them quickly didn't like the anti-hero thing, and were like, and this new look isn't as good as the old one. Now, I don't really like the OG look of Spider-Man, but it's way better than him with the with the Venom symbiote look. Now, I do have a theory, even for the comics. Real quick. You know how Venom looks with the whole mouth and tongue thing? My theory is Peter with the costume looks like that. But the thing is, him with the usual spider, closed mouth thing, mask and whatnot, that's what he thinks he looks like. And the reason some characters react with revulsion towards him when he's wearing the costume is because they actually see the mouth and the sticking tongue and the teeth. And they're like, ugh! Now, I think the comics did lean into that, where some of them were like, Spider-Man, what's the matter with you? And they're looking repulsed, because what did they see? And in the cartoon, it's the cartoon that really convinced me of this theory, because when he looks into the window after beating up Rhino, he sees, his reflection. What does it look like? Venom. And he's like, what the heck? Now, but here's the thing. When he next looks into the reflection, he looks like what he thinks he looks like, because what is the symbiote then realizing? I slipped up. Gotta cover that up. Because his first glance, the symbiote was kind of like, okay, well, it was kind of slower than him, and then on the second glance, it went, I have to hide what I really make him look like. What do you think of my little fan theory?
That's implausible, because I never caught on to that.
Yeah, neither did I as a kid. It's just on our most recent viewing, just at the time of this recording, just now, because we had to record the Venom episode, and just quickly glance through the comic, that I kind of picked up on when he looks into the window in the cartoon. He sees his reflection. He looks like Venom. Then he moves away. Now I know it's the creators start trying to hint at the next episode or two, but in universe, what's the explanation for that scene? And I figure he must look like he's got the mouth and tongue. What do you think of that idea?
It's very possible.
I never caught on until this viewing.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, Eddie Brock Venom's coming up. Even as when I was 6, I was like, that's coming up. Ooh, nice psychological little scene. But just now, I was like, how's this way of looking at it? But I think that's it.
Yeah, it's like, when you write anti-heroes, be careful with them. Be careful with edginess. Having some of that is fine, but going overboard...
Although it has led to great stories with, Azrael being driven insane by some leftover brain control, or Peter being mind controlled by the symbiote. It has led to some good ideas there. Mm-hmm. But at some point, if you started the character off as moral and they went anti-hero, you have to return them to their root.
You have to either go to the logical extreme, turn them into a villain, like Hank Hall.
Yeah.
or you have to get them redeemed, like Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, Hal Jordan, Azrael.
Exactly.
Although Hank Hall should never have been redeemed. He was always a nut, though.
Yeah.
Even before he got his powers, he was
Mm-hmm.
he was pretty much a murderer.
Yeah. And you know what? That's all I have to say.
Yeah, okay. Next time we'll be discussing, I think, Dan's favorite spider costume, the Scarlet Spider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or is it your favorite?
This con I prefer the 90s Spider-Man costume.
Okay, so it's your favorite Peter Parker costume. I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a good costume.
Yeah, I have to admit, it's probably my second favorite spider costume overall.
It's the hoodies done right.
Yep. So next time on The Problems, we're going to talk about Peter when he dons the Scarlet Spider costume. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment about what your favorite spider costume is, what your favorite Venom or Carnage story, favorite hosts for them, and whatnot. Even your favorite scene, we'd really love to see that. That would be cool. And hit that notification bell with a Carnage-style axe